So I think your 10 years is somewhat optimistic.
I think Putin, though, has some economic self-interest too at stake here, that he knows that he can push up until a point, and that even Russia is still dependent upon the economic connections and interdependence with Europe and with the EU, and that Putin's power, ambitions can be tempered somewhat by the reality of the economic necessity to work with the West and work with Germany in particular.
Let me present a counterfactual to that in a sense. He's spent billions of dollars building the ESPO pipeline, which is the Eastern Siberian Pacific Ocean pipeline, which has a trunk running down to China. And he is acquiring more and more resources, making more and more countries dependent upon it. And now he's doing the same thing with China. At least he is attempting to do the same thing with China with this new pipeline, which then goes on to the Kamchatka Peninsula, through which he feeds Japan and South Korea as well. So the practice of acquiring oil, natural gas, and making other countries dependent upon it solidifies his ability to practice great power geopolitics. And I suspect that a negotiating body like EU has no power whatsoever, no place at his table, and has no consideration from him. I cannot imagine that anything like the EU can do anything at all to stop him. He's got all the cards.
Question?
I would be interested to hear your views on, well, we're supposed to be talking about uprisings, but seems like a lot, and we're discussing possibly there could be a civil war in Ukraine in that area coming from it, and I was wondering, I would like to know how you view uprisings and whether it's just something natural that happens over time in certain areas might be prone to it, whether it's just a tool that various powers use. Like, do they need people to uprise to accomplish what they do? Is it really effective, or does it just kind of happen? And then it just seems like the people who are in that area just suffer. Like, it's not good for them, and it's a long period that it's very unstable economically, and so I'm just wondering, is there any way to avoid that?
I would say briefly, if you look at the initial events from which uprisings spring, there's often a sort of flashpoint or seminal event. Some guy in Tunisia lights himself on fire because he's been hassled by the cops. The Arab Spring spreads throughout the Middle East. In Táchira, down in Venezuela, a couple of students marched because a female student was raped and the cops did nothing about it. Now in Venezuela, you have students and middle-class people protesting the government there. There's some incident that ignites the flame. The tensions are there. What it is in Ukraine, I'm not really sure, because we've seen 2 uprisings now. And I'm not sure exactly where it goes. We seem to be at a point now where things are reaching a stasis. But I can't tell, because there has to be some next flashpoint. Somebody gets killed, somebody gets shot, they try to go in. The Ukrainian government is trying to get the pro-Russian wings out of these buildings and has threatened violence. So far it has not happened. But it could, as Yuri said, it could well happen by the time we get home this evening. And so once those things happen, then all hell breaks loose. And that's when the uprisings really explode.
Do you think the uprisings would happen from within Ukraine, or that Russian troops would move in as soon as they had the opportunity?
You've heard my opinion, and I would defer to others. My opinion is that this is viewed as an opportunity by Putin. And so he has a confrontational posture by his proxy pro-Russian entities, let's call them at this point. And if a flashpoint arises, somebody kills a pro-Russian protester or storms a building, it takes huge casualties, that could well be enough. There is a wonderful map, by the way, just from the BBC just today, about where the Russian troops have amassed along the border. Pretty cool map, pretty interesting map, pretty important map, if you're looking for what happens next.
Is there an ideal scenario in which we, resolve this crisis and learn from it and either prevent or in some way head off potential uprisings in the future in other parts of the world?
Well, what are you saying? Are you saying you don't want to see democratic uprisings of one sort or another? Was the uprising, the first uprising, the Kiev uprising, a democratic movement? An uprising of the people, an uprising of people trying to throw off the shackles of an authoritarian, corrupt dictator? That's a good thing, right? Isn't that a good thing?
I don't know. I'm here to learn that from you.
Should the United States be supportive of those kinds of movements?
So is your ideal ending to this conflict one in which Ukraine is democratic and everybody...
Oh, absolutely. 100%. I'm always on the side of democracy. I don't know about my two colleagues to the left of me, whether they are in agreement with that. But I'm always on the side of the people and democracy and liberalism in the end.
You should run for president.
Thank you.
George W. Bush II.
Oh!
Spreading democracy. Spreading democracy, you say.
Fair question.
On the note of what you're saying of supporting uprisings, how can we be sure that we don't end up putting something worse into the situation that leads to something far worse than what we had before?
Yeah, well, that's always the risk. Look what happened with the Arab Spring, for that matter, or in Egypt. And see what the outcome. Once you let the people decide, you never know what they're going to choose, right? They may choose a Hitler, for that matter, right? So that's where I think we have to be much more careful and cautious with full-scale support of liberalism. But I see a more, again, realistic situation developing where some kind of compromise, stalemate, detente will emerge over this situation. I don't disagree that Russia holds a lot of the powerful cards at this moment, certainly in that part of the world. But at the same time, I don't think they can risk too much more instability themselves. Whether that's the kind of, look at what's happened to the Russian currency, the Russian stock market. These things matter, and they will matter to some of the oligarchs in the end in Russia who support Putin. And to think that they're not on the phone with him, talking to him about how far and how careful he should be with this in terms of escalation, I think that's happening. I think it will happen. Now he may disregard it, he may be a fanatic, and he may be an ideologue, and just say, I have other interests that are more important, and I'll throw you in jail if you call me again, right? But I do think that there is a point at which too much push will get some pushback even within Russia, within some of the good leaders within Russia, right? I don't know, at the same time, you talk about the Russian troops massed on the Ukrainian border, and it is very worrisome, and it's a display of power, clearly. But we also need to be aware that, the Russian military, despite, some resurgence in strength in spending of money, could be exposed also for its weaknesses as well. You never know. And what would that mean to Putin? That would be the ultimate embarrassment if somehow, he sends in some troops and, it doesn't go well. Can you imagine that scenario? In some ways, that's what brought an end to the Soviet Union, right, in Afghanistan. So it's a dangerous game he plays, and he's a player. There's no doubt about it. He's a chess player in the mode of our good Dr. Polsky, who's pushing and pulling pawns around left and right. and dropping a few along the way, it's, you know, you want to be careful not to expose your king. That's a good one.
That's why they give you pawns, so that you can sacrifice them to set up your castles and your bishops and your queen.
Help me out here, Dr. Polsky.
Putin likes chess, but is not skillful in this game. He is judo, you know, judo specialist. It's,
Judo?
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I thought that was a classic move in chess, the judo.
No, no. No, but he follows chess, and he's a big sports fan and chess fan. So, yes,
But he could make a mistake.
very much so. But so far he's doing reasonably well, and he's very lucky with oil prices.
It's interesting because oil prices right now are, to you too, oil prices right now are at $108.08 as of this morning. West Texas Intermediate crude is in fact at $104.30. And it has been estimated that he needs, to meet the demands of his 2013 spending, he needs oil prices to be $117 per barrel. So he's losing money already. He has been losing money. Remember, in 1998, oil prices were $174 per barrel. He was making money hand over fist, and he could have used that money to improve the technologies of his industry, to foster some sort of reforms, economic reforms. He could have used that money for all sorts of stuff.
You said 1998?
Yes. Or I'm sorry, 2008. I'm sorry. Excuse me.
No, I will not.
2008. 2008, $174.
Yes, 98, of course.
Yeah, he was. I have to bite my tongue what he was doing in 1998. In 2008, he had the opportunity. He was flush with money. He was rolling in.
And he used it to fight Georgia.
Yes.
To achieve a huge victory over this powerful opponent.
But it was an important position because the pipeline from Baku to Tbilisi to Ceyhan ran right outside South Ossetia. He is within 400 meters of a pipeline that feeds the Western countries, that was produced or was built by Western corporations, including support from the United States. He took South Ossetia. By the way, he claimed that there were Russians living in South Ossetia that he had to protect. And so he used the same playbook. Now, it's a very different circumstance, but it's out of the same playbook. And he used that to take control of the area that gives him leverage over a pipeline that his competitors have built. He's terribly interested, I believe, from what I see him do and where I see him do it, in controlling the flow of natural resources.
Let me talk about civil war a little bit, with the exception of Dr. Lodel, who seems, well, his belief is that it might reach a detente or some sort of peaceful negotiation. Is civil war inevitable, and is it really possible that the Ukrainians will go, basically, essentially, Ukrainians killing Ukrainians? Do they identify so much as Russians? Because I know you hear like a lot on the media and on CNN, you know, they interview people saying, you know, I'm Russian, I'm not Ukrainian, or whatever. Or do they identify so much with the Russian, the pro-Russian like propaganda or whatnot, or just that they feel like they are part of Russia already? Is it possible that it really starts to battle over into a huge civil conflict?
Yes, there is a chance. And there were casualties already today, by the way. There were casualties in fighting. Pro-Russian militia suffered several casualties in Kramatorsk. It can escalate easily, and no negotiations could prevent it. That's possible, that's one way. But altogether, that's unpredictable, totally nobody knows. It can procrastinate like it is today. All options are on the table, all variants. So this civil war is quite possible. And the United States and Russia do not trust each other at all. Kerry talks to Lavrov, Russian foreign minister, but nothing happens. And that will continue. There is tremendous mistrust. Russia believes they are taken for a ride all the time. No words that were given to them are honored. And that will continue regardless. So that's a dangerous situation.
Any other feelings about that?
I don't feel qualified to answer.
I don't disagree with my good colleague, Dr. Polsky.
Question?
If civil war were to happen, would any outside countries intervene?
Oh, no, only Russia.
Only
Oh, there will be talk, of course. McCain will offer $1 billion. Another $1 billion he will deliver on a silver plate. But that's all.
I think we should put him in a fighter plane and head him.
Yeah. I remember how Bush answered the question when Georgia conflict was underway. He had a very serious face, and he said, "I don't rule in or out anything." When the Georgia conflict was underway. But even Bush understood that not a single American soldier will be sent there under any circumstances. If Russia were to take entire Georgia, the United States would complain to the United Nations Security Council on that. And that's the same situation with Ukraine.
Not our Georgia. If they took our Georgia, we'd have issue.
But they may take Westchester for sure. If this morale will continue, this indifference and lack of responsibility, I'm sure the Russian soldiers will be seen at Exton Mall soon.
We must be getting late. Some reference by Dr. Polsky of Exton Mall suggests we're getting to the end.
Yeah. I just wanted to make one more point because it was mentioned earlier. Being the Civil War, so does that mean we're past the U.S. NATO intervention, or are we going to have another totally different circumstance? Yugoslavia was mentioned, where we aren't even going to, after the fact, have a Belgrade bombing type thing, or are we just going to, kind of ignore it? I'm not saying it's for or against, but do we have kind of a horse in this race at all?
Yes, in Yugoslavia we had no opponent. And here there is a huge opponent that will fight with tenacity. That's Putin. Not himself, but he will send Russian boys to die. So United States will swallow whatever happens in Ukraine. Sanctions will be applied if needed. But it's a very open situation. Again, totally unpredictable how far Russia can go and what will happen. Emotion will play a big role. That's what I think is happening now.
There'll be no Western intervention, no NATO intervention, no U.S. intervention, no UN intervention. It is very unstable.
It could be.
Emotions could.
Yes, it could be not that violent, but it could be very poisonous and acrimonious for months to come.
What about the split of Ukraine?
That's possible too. Yes, that's an option.
About the annexation, incorporation of some parts.
Yes, Donetsk, Lugansk. There is a whole area, including those areas you included, that you claim they are Ukrainian language dominated. That's unbelievable.
We can't get away from that map.
But it's very characteristic of American misperception of this situation.
I will take one more question.
There is nothing wrong with it. Again, please don't.
Oh no, you've only just denigrated it several times over. You have several times over. You have said it's a crappy map and it's wrong.
I did not use those words.
Now you say, oh, I don't mean to cast aspersions.
Exactly.
You've been casting
I did
aspersions
not
all
use
along.
these words.
You're a lying son of a bitch.
All right, I don't have a bleep button.
That's absolutely unbelievable. If the situation continues like that in the United Nations, that civil war
They don't
will
allow
happen.
that.
I told you when I got here, you promised me a fist fight.
There's a question from the man in the back.
We'll take the last question.
I know there was mention of, say, Ukraine possibly splitting up. Do you think that might ultimately be a solution to involve, a larger conflict, or do you think that might increase tensions?
I think it might actually be a reasonable solution in some ways. I mean, these fractures have been there for ages in some ways, for centuries. And, the Ukrainian map, or the Ukrainian state that we see on the map, is a creation in and of itself of not matching up with the realities on the ground. Whether you talk about true Ukrainians in the West, who will feel they are a separate sovereign nation and should split off from the rest of whatever that is over in the East. Yeah, absolutely. And the Crimea, in and of itself, Russia.
Do you think that might be enough to fuel Putin's appetite? Do you think that might I don't mean to drag this out, but do you think like that might be enough to like fuel Putin's appetite? Or
I
do you
guess
think-
it's where you draw the lines on the map and where those pipelines are, to go back to Jake's point. You have to be very careful where you're drawing the lines on the map. But in some ways, you know, that has been one solution to the tensions of these polyglot or multi-whatever countries like Ukraine, right? It isn't homogeneous, and the answer may be you need to create a homogeneous entity, right?
Right, and with that, we will conclude. It's getting late, and tensions are kind of